Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey everyone, welcome back to the OT is In podcast. My name is Sarah Collins, and in today's episode, we are thrilled to have Sydney Bassard, a speech therapist with a rich background in literacy and speech. Sydney joins us to delve into the fascinating connection between literacy and speech development. From her unique journey into speech pathology, starting with a public health undergrad and a master's program focused on literacy, to her work now with individuals with dyslexia and those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Sydney's insights are truly invaluable. We'll explore everything from early development to reading progression and what to do when encountering struggles along the way. She provides practical tips for parents on integrating literacy into daily routines. Plus, we'll touch on what you could expect in a literacy-focused session with an SLP, and what questions to ask, and when to know when to access those speech therapy services, especially how to find the right one. So whether you're a parent, educator, or fellow therapist, this episode is packed with actionable advice and expert knowledge that you won't want to miss. So sit back and relax, and let's dive into this enlightening discussion with Sydney Bassard on how we can better support our children's literacy and speech development together. Hey, homeschool parents, I am so excited that you are here for the OT is In podcast. We just celebrated our 6-month anniversary, and hearing how this podcast has impacted your homeschool is such an honor. I want to be sure, though, that you know all the ways that I can support you through Homeschool OT. So we offer 3 fantastic services. First is community. This OT is In membership where you get weekly group coaching, a library full of helpful resources, access to a community of like-minded parents, a monthly book club, and a private question and answer session every 90 days. Another option is a private consultation. So this is personalized to dive into the nitty-gritty of your homeschool so that you can create customized strategies that fit your child's specific needs, with the goal that your homeschool is used to help your child to be successful in what they specifically need and want to do during the day now and in the future. And the third option are the classes. These are topic-based focus groups on critical areas like handwriting, sensory needs, and executive functioning. And all of this provides in-depth guidance on the why. So with Homeschool OT, the goal is that you understand, yes, that why, and how to support your child. You don't just get advice. You get actionable solutions from me, a licensed OT, and a fellow homeschool mom. So visit homeschoolot.com to learn more. And thank you again for being here. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. My name is Sarah Collins, and today I have Sydney Bassard with me, who is a speech therapist, and she's going to talk with us all about how literacy and speech are connected. So, Sydney, first of all, I'm totally honored to host you today. How did you get into this? Is literacy a common path for a speech language pathologist?
Yeah, first off, let me say thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here. And to answer your question, I would say that it depends on the SLP and the focus. So a lot of times people don't know that speech language pathologist, our scope of practice really encompasses like birth all the way into some end of life type care. So when we go to grad school in our training programs, we are really trained in understanding birth all the way to end of life. And my path is a little bit different because I started off working for a reading intervention company while I was in undergrad. And my path is just different in general because my undergrad's not in speech pathology either, it's in public health. And so once I finished undergrad, then I ended up going to a master's program that had a heavy focus on literacy. And so that's something else that people can think about is that SLP programs, depending on the faculty, have different strengths and areas of emphasis versus others. Some might be a little bit more medical focused. So like the SLP you might see in the hospital, some tend to be a little bit more school and pediatric focused. If you have faculty who are like really passionate about reading and literacy, you might get a lot more of that coursework. So it just depends.
I would say OT is the same way. I mentioned to you before that I know and love vision and it makes such a difference with our kids with reading. But I think one of the reasons why was because one of my professors did all of his research in vision and primarily towards the end of life and preserving your ability to keep going with all the occupations that you need and want to do. But that makes a lot of sense. So where are you now? Could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself before we really dive into this?
Yeah, so I am now in Charlotte, North Carolina. I own my own private practice, the Listening SLP, and we focus on working with individuals who are dyslexic, people that have literacy-based challenges, children and adults who are deaf and hard of hearing. I grew up in Charlotte, so this is home. But for the past 5 years, I've been operating the Listening SLP on social media with our goal of creating equity of health information, so equal access to health information without people having to go through barriers. And I'm excited because even though I'm a clinician, I still get to do research-based things. I am currently working on a research grant with one of my old professors looking at writing interventions for kids who are deaf and hard of hearing.
Wow. You have your hand in so many different areas. I love that so much. So let's talk a little bit about speech development specifically. Now, you mentioned quite a bit on your Instagram, the Listening SLP, like you mentioned, and people should go and for sure follow there. But you mentioned a bit about the phonemic awareness hierarchy. So can you explain what that is and how that affects our kids?
Yeah. So phonemic awareness, for people that don't know, is the ability to like perceive individual speech sounds and being able to manipulate them or do something with them in some way. And so that is actually like phonological awareness is the umbrella term that phonemic awareness falls under. And that is the building blocks for reading. Research has found that when kids are able to segment and blend those individual sounds, then it shows correlation with later reading ability. And so basically the hierarchy is just being able to understand the progression that we see with those different skills. So it's going to start with, are you able to just be able to manipulate things at the individual word level, then at the syllable level? Then are you able to pull off like that initial sound? So if our word is dog, for example, are you able to pull off that is, and then we get into the more complex things of being able to segment. So pull it apart. If our word is dog, you can go d, ah, g, or blend. If I give a child d, ah, g, they can blend it together and tell me that the word is dog. And those last two tend to be difficult. And the manipulation is like the highest step, which if we have the word dog and I tell a kid, hey, change the g to a t, our word is now dot. Those skills tend to be, they tend to be really cool and interesting, but they also tend to be difficult. And a lot of times people think that they have to wait until a kid is like in kindergarten and receiving formal education before they do any of those things. And the reality is you don't. You can start working on what we call wordplay things when kids are really early and they have a good grasp and understanding of what a word is and how to pronounce a word. And then as they get older, then they become more intentional with the skills in order to do some of those harder tasks.
So you mentioned some about like starting kindergarten, but wordplay earlier. I want to go back to that. But can we start with what are the typical developmental ages and stages that as you're going through that you would be able to do some of these things?
Yeah, so I think again, it's probably around 2. That's when we see that they should be really solid with having a nice group of words, especially words that they are comfortable with saying and they sound pretty accurate. That's when you can start doing a little bit of what we call wordplay. So doing some rhyme type things. If the word is ball, we could go ball, fall, mall. And the fun thing with those is that it doesn't have to be a real word. It can be
Right.
made up. It can be silly. We are leaning into play with that. And then from rhyming, we might move on a little bit more to onset. Typically, kids like 3 to 4 are able to do that, where they're just pulling off that first sound and playing around with those. Or you can have them say, let's see if we can find all the words that start with our D. And even with this, you can pair some of it with letters. The emphasis doesn't have to be on teaching the alphabet, but just exposing them to that written part as well. And then when kids get to be a little older, like 4 and 5, that's when we see some more of like the segmenting, blending, manipulation come in. Because what we always want to remember is that speech and learning to talk is a natural process. Reading is not a natural process. So kids do not naturally learn how to read. They have to be explicitly taught, but they also have to be developmentally ready for it. Most 2-year-olds are not developmentally ready to be taught how to understand the alphabet, but can we expose them to literacy type things? Absolutely.
That is, oh, such a big thing, right? You have to be developmentally ready. So let's talk a little bit more about what could this play look like? So not just exposing specifically to the alphabet itself, but like playing with words. What are some ideas that parents could take away today? I'm going to go do this with my child right now.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I encourage parents to do all the time is to lean into their daily routines. This doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to create a block of time to sit there and go over some of these early literacy skills with my kids. It's no, let's think about our daily routine. So quite honestly, especially if you drive like the same route to wherever you take your kid, if you're taking them to the doctor or if you take them to the park, whatever you guys do, drive time wise, point out the different things as you're going along. And it's, oh, do you see our stop sign? It starts with a sound. And oh, look, we see a snake on the road. That also starts with a snout, especially if it's like things that you are constantly seeing, if it's like on a billboard, if it's a store or different things like that.
Stuck on seeing a snake on the road because that would totally
I
be
mean,
like, oh, look at the snake.
and we're going to keep driving. I think I'd personally
Right.
freak out, even though I'm in my car. I think bath times are always fun, right? Bubbles, you can clap out the syllables in bubbles. You can clap out the syllables in soap. You can talk about the different properties because literacy isn't all just word reading and wordplay. It's also being able to understand like the language, talking about some of these different things when you're engaged with them. Cooking time is a great one too, to talk about all the different things that you might need in order to cook. See if your kid can help remember some of the directions, talk about the different foods that have to go in, and then maybe do a rhyming game with some of them and talk about, oh, that's something like we wouldn't put in food, right? Oh, your socks. Do your socks go in there? Oh, no, they don't go in there. So all types of ways to make learning engaging and fun without it being high stress.
You are speaking to my OT homeschooling heart here. There are so many things that we can build into our just daily routines where we don't have to sit down and have a specific curriculum, but you can be really talking through, you can just build in exactly what you're saying to what you're already doing and having to get done. Oh, I love that so much. So you also mentioned quite a bit about literacy tips versus these literacy kind of tricks. So could you define that a little bit for me? And then why do you think one is more important or one isn't, doesn't work?
Yeah, so literacy tips are things that I define as things have been found to be helpful by scientific research in order to help support kids with their reading. So some of those things are like being able to tap out or sound out the sounds and words, making sure that we're making a connection with vocabulary of not just reading the word and giving like a straight dictionary answer, but we're adding multisensory components of learning, a gesture with it. We're using the words in different contexts. All of those things tend to be helpful when we are engaging kids in that reading process versus what we call literacy tricks. And these are things that we have seen done in classrooms and other educational settings for years, but they're not encouraging kids to be strong readers. So that's like what we call guess and go. You look at a word, you might look at the first letter and you go. Using picture clues, You look at the picture on the page, and then you also try to figure out what the sentence is saying. Those are things we don't want to encourage. And some people might say, but why? The picture does help. The picture helps while a picture is there, right? What we do know is that eventually in text, pictures and visuals go away, and kids do not have that to support on. So we don't want them to become so reliant on that they're not actually reading the word. And this is like a whole different tangent, but language demands increase as kids get older, meaning that they have to understand more of background knowledge, vocabulary, sentence structure, especially as we get into more academic text, right? Versus some of the more like storybooks that they might be reading now. And since those increases kids get older, the ability to read the words should become more increasingly automatic, because we want them to just like basically look at the words and being able to quickly figure it out, so they can use more of that mental energy and load on being able to actually understand what they're reading, instead of trying to spend all of their time figuring out what it says.
In episodes 33 through 36, you'll be hearing about one of the most talked about occupations in the education field: literacy. Obviously, understanding the written word affects all other subjects as time goes on. You've likely heard terms like learning to read progresses to reading to learn. But we don't always think about how literacy affects math. Years ago, when we were going through vision therapy because my son was unable to visually track the letters on a page, I knew I needed to accommodate him in other subjects like science and history. We read and talked aloud for almost everything. But math curriculums were also an issue. Reading the problems on worksheets and workbooks were difficult, but reading word problems was absolutely impossible. And this is one of the reasons that we switched to CTC Math. For every problem, a person can click on the audio and hear the problem read aloud. Bonus, my son loved the Australian accent. So if your child needs the skills of reading separated from math, this is a great program for you. So visit ctcmath.com to check it out. So if we're not going to start, or we might be using some of those tricks as they're younger, so maybe looking at some of those pictures, but really trying to make sure that the kids are understanding the letters as they're going along and understanding that process. Is there a difference with kiddos who have other issues as far as speech goes, maybe saying the R's, maybe saying T's, things like that? Do you see a difference as far as literacy goes there?
So the instructional part for literacy isn't going to change. That's where being able to know who you're working with and the student in front of you is going to be critical, because then you know, like, okay, if we are reading a word and this kid is like constantly saying like the L, like the L sound for an R. Okay, it's not that they don't know that's R, it's that they are struggling with that production. So that's where collaborating with the SLP your kid works with is good. Having a baseline understanding of those things as well is appropriate, but doing some differential type things. So don't let it always be expressive, especially if a kid has speech sound disorder. I have worked with kids time and time again where like the teacher has said they struggle with all of these different sounds. And then we look at it, no, they struggle with the production of those. Right. But if we do receptive based tasks, you give them two different things. And can you tell me which one has the sound in it, which one represents that? And they're able to pick it out. Receptively, they do understand the correlation. Just expressively, they're not able to produce it. So we don't want to penalize kids for that, especially when we know that they have other kind of things going on in the background.
You're saying tease that out a little bit and try to see. And do you feel like an SLP is the spot to go to help to tease that out?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay.
If you're like, we're not really sure what's going on, definitely come see an SLP. Early intervention is always advised, an articulation based test. So to see like how a child is doing with speech sound production can always be given. Screeners can be done just to see where they're at. But I would encourage people to always lean that route versus automatically jumping to there's something else going on or that the kid is struggling. Let's just cover our bases and make sure that there isn't other things impeding our production of letter sound correspondences.
So, what are some, if you could give me two questions or so that a parent could be asking themselves to think, okay, is this time for me to go? And I love that you mentioned early intervention, that we talk about that a lot as far as occupational therapy as well. But so, if a parent is saying, okay, I think that I might need to go to a speech therapist right now, what are some questions they can ask themselves to confirm or deny yes or no, I don't need to go?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, does my child demonstrate any difficulty with like language processing, comprehension of conversation, being able to engage in conversation, even if your kid is able to talk, because I'll say some kids have the gift of gab, be like looking at, is the conversation organized? And what I mean by that is their thoughts organized? Are they put together? Or do they sound a little bit like this is disjointed and the story doesn't make sense? Those are things we might want to think about from that standpoint. And then more from like the speech standpoint, intelligibility. Am I able to understand my child? Or is my child consistently having difficulty with sound, like certain sounds and certain words? Those are areas we want to look at. And then generally, I tend to always be on the side of just go get it checked out. It
Right.
hurts nobody to go get it checked out if you have those questions. And then that's what professionals are for. And like, we can help you tease apart, yes, this is something we need to discuss, or no, this is something that your kid is fine and we can put them on consultation, or you're good to go and this is developmentally normal.
Love it. Trust your gut, right? If you feel like there is something, then go and build your team for sure. And to go along with that, you were mentioning that you have a heavy background in literacy, but there might be another speech therapist who specializes in something else. What are some questions that you would generally recommend parents ask a speech therapist when they're coming in to find the right fit for them?
Oh yeah, I have a whole 5-question guide on my website about
I
this.
love it. So we will make
But
sure that is linked. Perfect.
yeah, but basically, like, you just want to find out what people's experiences are, what their therapeutic style is, what like their comfortability level is in working with a particular diagnosis, and like really don't feel uncomfortable to ask tough questions. I know that sometimes people get really prideful or like, I have my credentials, and it's yes, but this is still someone's kid, and you can just
Right.
answer the question, and do a little bit of research. I think a little bit of research goes a long way into asking. And then I think for any therapist that's listening, being honest, right? It's not always a numbers game of how many clients are on your caseload or making sure that a therapist is full. It's being honest and
Mhm.
saying, this family is coming to you for literacy based help and you don't have any solid understanding of literacy.
Yeah, that's
Help
not, it's
them
not a good
find some.
fit.
And it's okay. And it's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay to
yeah,
say it's not a good fit. It's okay to say, I need to refer you on. Those things are
yeah.
okay. We don't have to be ashamed, but we cannot be prideful.
Yes, yes. Now, for us as homeschoolers, and each state is kind of different. Here in Pennsylvania, we can go into the public school system and get tested and then have school-based therapy and stuff. We also can, based on your insurance, happen to either private practice or private pay, things like that. So, would you recommend if we are looking at older kids, right? When would you recommend, or is there a difference in going in through the school system versus trying to look at private practice for literacy based?
Yeah, so for that's, I think, a good point. Speech pathologists, depending on where you live in the schools, may not be touching literacy at all. And
Okay.
that's just because the way that schools are constructed, they generally have reading interventionists that tend to cover that in the school-based setting. So an SLP may not even be like per their state and their guidelines and their district touching any of that. So
Okay.
just be mindful of that. And if you are receiving school-based services, you're like, my SLP isn't working on literacy, like it may be because that's not deemed like appropriate. So don't go
Okay.
in with the pitchforks. But also on the flip side of that, like you do have privatized intervention. Sometimes insurance companies will cover literacy. It just depends. I think that it doesn't hurt either way you tend to go. You just might have to do a little bit of digging to see, because in the schools, the reading stuff might be more so covered by whoever the reading interventionist is versus the speech language
So,
pathologist.
what would be the difference in a speech language pathologist covering literacy and the reading specialist?
I think Probably no difference. From what I've learned, it's not really any different. It's just like the reading interventionist, that is their thing, that is their job, versus what I was saying before about the SLP is expected to cover a whole bunch
All
of
of
stuff.
those
And
things.
even
Yeah.
within the schools, like they're covering working with autistic children, they're covering the articulation, the language-based things. So their caseloads get pretty full. And then you're adding any child that has reading related difficulties on top of that, our caseloads would be astronomical. So tends to be more of the reason why, like in other settings, you see it sparsed out to people who like they are dedicated to reading and resource and things like that.
I love this. So there's a client who actually sent me in something earlier, which kind of spurred this whole thing. And she is a person who her child needs like very specific, this is what you can expect before they go into somewhere. So I know that you are very individualized within your program and that you're having to do assessments and stuff before. But if there was just a kind of general, this is what you can expect when you would come into a session with a speech therapist working on literacy, is there a general expectation of what that might look like?
Oh, that's tough. I think the general expectation is the same across the board for all the people I work with. Expect that we are going to do some word reading at the individual level. Expect that we are going to talk about the rules of like why certain words are spelled the way that they are. Expect that we're going to do some sentence reading. Expect that we'll do some spelling where you are required to spell the word out yourself. I think that those are all realistic expectations of
Okay.
kind of what goes on in a session.
But you've also mentioned play quite a bit too, right? So it's not, is it majority sitting at a table or would it be all over?
I think that depends on the kid. I've worked with college age students. We're not playing, right?
We're not on any
I'm
scooters riding around, finding
exactly.
letters.
But for some of like the smaller kids, it might involve a little bit more play, but it still is a little bit more structured, but you can always make it innovative. Like I was talking to a family last week about how we could write words out on a sticky note, and you put sticky notes on the wall and use like those ball poppers, and as they read a word, they pop the word with the ball popper. So it doesn't have to look super structured, but I also too don't want to ever set that expectation that it's, I like to be realistic. Like this is the work we have to do. And like when we can incorporate play, great. But to give kids like, and it's going to be fun. No, like sometimes it's not going to be
It's
fun.
hard.
And
Yeah.
life's not going to be fun. And that's okay. So just keeping that, these are the things that you have to do. Now, when we can incorporate like a play activity or things with it, sure. But then it almost, oh yeah, this is fun. And I got to do this versus I'm expecting to play a game and we're not playing a game. And then that leads to a whole nother situation, mess and breakdown.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what she was trying to say. Do I tell her that it's going to be this whole fun thing, or do I tell her that we're really going to be working on specifically working? Oh, I love that. You mentioned some of the research that you're doing, but tell me a little bit more of what people can find on on your website. You also mentioned the speech language, what questions we can ask. What are some things that people can come to you who aren't in Charlotte and can find?
Yeah, so we have free downloads that are on our website of a variety of different topics that are available for people to take and use as they need to. That's available regardless, and there's no paywall or having to submit an email. It's just readily available, open to the public. So that's one resource that we have. You can always find out like where I'll be speaking at next. So sometimes I get to travel and do speaking engagements at different places, and not always travel. Sometimes it's virtual too. And whenever it's a free event, I always try to denote that. So regardless of if you are in the area or not, you can virtually join for free and come learn that way. We do offer like client services for people in obviously Charlotte, North Carolina area, but throughout North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia via teletherapy. And then I have consultation options, which a lot of families I find really appreciate that, where we're able to set up a Zoom meeting for 45 minutes or an hour. And then it always has a follow-up call with it just to see and point people in the right direction that best suit their needs.
I love this. And say all your handles just to make sure. We'll make sure that they're linked here in the show notes too. But so for people who are driving, hopefully not seeing that snake, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at The Listening SLP on all social media platforms. We are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We also have some things on YouTube. And then if you're looking for our website, it's www.thelisteningslp.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. I know that this is going to definitely make a difference in some of our homeschool community lives. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.